most powerful invasion air force ever launched. Some of the 11,000 planes that opened the path through the so-called impregnable Atlantic Wall. Yank paratroopers received last-minute instructions before taking off for the invasion coast 100 miles across the English Channel. These are the heroes who established first contact with the enemy. The Coast Guard, the Navy, the Air Forces land hundreds of thousands of British, Canadians, and Yanks on Hitler's doorstep within a few days. The cost of our initial landing was but a fraction of what our leaders expected. More than 10,000 German prisoners were captured in the first few days of the battle. Let these pictures remind us that there's still a long road ahead to Berlin. Buy that extra bond today.
We dedicate a monument to the leadership of noble men.
We reflect on the proud history of the heroic men that served here.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Richard D. Winters Leadership Monument recognizing all those who led the way on D-Day.
My name is Damien Lewis. In the year 2000, I was chosen to portray a World War II veteran by the name of Richard D. Winters in HBO's Band of Brothers. The 10-part television series was based on a book written by author Stephen Ambrose. For me, it turned out to be much more than just another acting job. It was a defining moment in my life and provided an opportunity to bring honor to a humble but proud man whom I came to admire and respect. Dick Winters led his soldiers in some of the fiercest fights of World War II. He didn't lead them from the back, he led from the front. His concern lay not only in the mission, but also in the well-being of his men. During decisive moments in battle, Richard D. Winters would often say two simple words to the men of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 2nd Battalion of the 101st Airborne Division. It wasn't so much the phrase he uttered to his soldiers that instilled courage and determination in them, but rather the leadership qualities of the man who said them. There is no question that Dick Winters had the full respect and confidence of those brave men who served under him in some of the most epic fights in Europe in World War II. It was during pivotal moments in places like Normandy on June 6, 1944, and the days following D-Day, that Easy Company's first true combat leader encouraged his men to hang tough.
Messieurs et mesdames les élus, Général.
On a cloudy, windy morning in France, and on the anniversary of D-Day, hundreds of people gather to honor this leader of men and those two simple words, as well as recognize all the soldiers of the American Army who led the way on June 6, 1944.
The monument's about leadership, so I wanted to have some dynamic and power behind the figure, and what better character or identity than Richard Winters to portray. And so there's some aspects of just showing the action and the power in the sense of this is a guy you want to be behind. And I hope that we're able to do that.
Growing up in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, there were no thoughts in young Richard Winters' mind about parachuting out of airplanes, commanding men in battle, or future monuments honoring leadership. But there was one skill already being taught at home by his parents Richard and Edith that would prove useful later on in shaping Dick Winters as a combat soldier.
My upbringing, I had the strict discipline that follows the Mennonite group. As you look back now, you appreciate it. At the time, it just made you a little bit different than the other fellows. If we look at Eisenhower, who wasn't too bad a leader in the World War II, do you realize his parents were Mennonite?
A business degree from nearby Franklin and Marshall College was a safe and sensible plan of action for Richard Winters. In Lancaster County, in the late 1930s, there were signs that the Great Depression was finally subsiding, and prospects for work across southeastern Pennsylvania were improving. But there were also rumblings of war coming from Europe and the Far East, so in 1940, in preparation, the United States established a military draft. Dick Winters didn't think twice about joining the service right after he graduated from college in June of 1941, but not because he always wanted to be a soldier.
I made a decision, look, I'm going to volunteer, take care of this military obligation, and then when I have that taken care of, then go get a job. Then I don't have to worry about interrupting my livelihood.
December 7th.
What I overlooked was the fact that in December we had Pearl Harbor. So then you're in for the duration. The advantage was I had my basic training completed, and I had found out how to live in the Army. Some of the fellows from Lancaster, for example, who came into the Army after Pearl Harbor, here I was an officer by that time, and I was putting them through basic training. And that gives you a challenge on leadership.
Without giving it much thought, Richard Winters had displayed other important characteristics of leadership. A good leader needs to be able to think ahead, anticipate a situation, and make a decision based on the best information available. All of which also played into Dick Winters' decision to give something new called the Airborne Paratroops a try.
Went to Fort Benning, Georgia for officers training school. That's where they qualified the paratroopers. So each day, as you're going from class to class, or through your training there at OCS, you saw the paratroopers, and they're going through their basic training. Every place they moved on the double. They were all good-looking, husky young men, and they would sing their songs, the marching songs, as they were moving along. I looked at them and I thought, that's the kind of fellas I want to go to combat with. You're going to go to war. I want to go with the best. And that is the best-looking men, troops that I've seen. Just a few months earlier, when I went in the Army, I was making $21 a month. We used to refer to it as $21 a day, once a month. You don't do much with $21 a month, but my goodness, here these fellas are making $100 a month more. When they pay you $100 a month to be a paratrooper, to jump behind the lines, that is blood money. you earn it.
Long before he started to earn that extra pay in battle, there was physical training at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, beginning in the summer of 1942. That's where 2nd Lieutenant Richard D. Winters joined Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment and was introduced to his new company commander, 1st Lieutenant Herbert M. Sobel, who had his own distinct leadership style.
He stepped over the line. With his discipline, it was unfair, and it became unbearable. And it just wasn't with one man. He didn't pick on anybody. He picked on everybody. Officers, enlisted men. For example, in inspecting the troops, this idea of if he couldn't find anything wrong with your rifle or your uniform or so forth, he would look at your ears and say, dirty ears. It was just unreasonable. And so that what the men had in common was that they resented that. There were weekends, for example, that we might go together to go to town or something like that. And he had a good sense of humor. And he was okay. He had been born and raised in Chicago, so he was completely lost. If you were out in the field, he couldn't read a map. Why, I don't know. He could learn to read a map. He never did learn. He was constantly lost. And he was ill at ease with himself. And he was doing dumb things, trying to be a leader.
At Toccoa, Richard Winters became Easy Company's top junior officer and was promoted to 1st Lieutenant.
The first example you must set is that you must spend your time with the men. Going back to Sobel here for a minute, time after time, he had some excuse, some reason for turning the company over to me. You have to work with the men. And by working with the men, they get to know you. And if you do a good job, that's how you say, follow me.
Despite his very strong bond with the enlisted men in Easy, Dick Winters believed in that old Army creed that the relationship between officers and the men they lead had to be different.
At no point can an officer feel that he's as close and has bonded as the men have, who have lived together night and day when the chips are down. You're set aside, you're just a bit different. You're close, they know you and respect you and they'll follow you, but you're just a bit, you're set off on a different notch in the society of the Army, of the military.
In the shadow of Currahee Mountain is where Dick Winters learned that being a strong leader also meant being able to rely on others to help get the job done. That included fellow soldiers who had vastly different strengths and weaknesses than his own. Training for war brought people together at Toccoa. Some were educated, some not. Many came from big cities, others from small towns. In the case of Dick Winters, a Mennonite from Pennsylvania Dutch country who didn't drink, smoke, or swear, his closest alliance from Toccoa through World War II was with fellow Lieutenant Lewis Nixon, an alcoholic and frequent cusser raised in New York City.
I was reminded by my friend Nixon at one point. He said, I pity you. He was the alcoholic. He said, you know, when you get up in the morning, that's as good as you're going to feel all day. With me, when he drank all day, he feels better as the day goes along. I took care of the problems and the leadership and the running of the thing during the daytime, and Nixon took care of patrolling the lines and seeing that everybody's on the job at nighttime. when he was functioning at his peak of efficiency. So the two of us worked together just beautiful.
Dick Winters also knew Easy Company would need to develop good non-commissioned officers, or NCOs. Corporals and sergeants who would become leaders themselves and be the glue that held the enlisted men together.
Well, as time goes along and you get in training, and the ones that are the smartest, the ones that are good, the ones that can be leaders are then shifted around. The ability of each man will come out during training.
For sculptor Stephen Spears, leadership is more than just a word. It's a visual representation of a man's ability to be out front. It's not just about giving an order to your men. It's also about being the man who leads the way once the mission is defined. Capturing that moment in a bronze monument is essential, or, as I found out myself with the cameras rolling, very challenging, especially when portraying a man with such a commanding presence. As Spears sketched out some early ideas for the design of the Richard D. Winters Leadership Monument, he knew full well this statue must display confidence and do justice to a soldier who always led his men from the front. Spears was also aware that the pedestal the statue would sit on would need to represent many other men of the United States Army who led their own soldiers with great initiative and courage on June 6, 1944.
I think a good leader is a man who knows what has to be done and sets about to do it. But he also has to know about the people that he's got to do it with.
You're not liking a guy and you know he's got the ability to lead you. You don't care whether you like him or dislike him. First of all, guts.
Guts.
Second of all, brains.
Guts, a lot of guts.
You ain't got the brains, you don't belong there.
A lot of guts.
Because you're going to take men with you when he gets killed.
You don't want them to, you want to take no men, no matter if they hate you or not. You want to get them in alive and get them out alive.
You got to look up to the guy and like him. If you don't look up to him and like him, you're not going to go with him. And then everybody tells you any different. They're talking through their hat.
I think being honest with the guys, tell them exactly what to expect and what to do, and the fact that they respect you as a person. You have to be respected as a person, or you'd never be a good leader.
That's just the way it is. They seem to go ahead of the class, take over. The men seem to respect them. They might be a little older.
I think the general rule with the military is they don't lead from the front. But some of ours did, and I respected them a lot more than I did the one that followed.
Set an example, let them follow you, so that when you give an order, they don't hesitate. Is it a good order? How far do I want to go with this? The action is immediate. And in combat, that is the difference between winning and losing. It's the guy that gets the first shot off, the guy that does it right, and the guy that has everybody thinking in the same way immediately. That's a difference in battle right there. And it's obvious. Get the first shot off and make it a good one.
Soldiers are fully aware that a good officer gives them a better chance of staying alive. They also know a lousy one gets guys killed. Easy Company men say it wasn't hard to recognize a bad leader.
One that was interested in their own objectives only and not caring what happens to the people around them as long as they accomplish their goals, or not being able to meet a situation that demanded some insight into the seriousness of it and how to get about solving the problems.
And if you had an officer that couldn't handle it, you read it, you've seen it, you know it. And that's what you couldn't follow.
In England, in the weeks prior to D-Day, Dick Winters lived here, on the second floor of this store in Aldbourne. The shop was owned by a friendly English family named Barnes. Richard Winters' peaceful life was about to change, however, as he and thousands of other American paratroopers left England on the night of June 5th, jumping into Normandy, France, in the early morning hours of June 6th. On D-Day, First Lieutenant Richard D. Winters of the 101st Airborne Division found himself acting commander of Easy Company, 2nd Battalion of the 506th. There was no doubt he was mentally and physically ready for the job. Some of that thanks to his training experiences with Captain Sobel, but mostly because of Dick Winters' own intrinsic leadership capabilities.
In civilian life, it's the same way. Know your job. That way, when it comes time for a decision to be made, there's no question that the folks have faith in you.
Herbert Sobel had been replaced as E Company commander by Lieutenant Thomas Meehan prior to the Normandy jump. But Meehan's plane was missing on D-Day, and 4 German 105mm guns, pounding the 4th Infantry Division landing at Utah Beach 3 miles away, needed to be silenced. The firing towards Causeway No. 2 at Utah was coming from along a hedgerow near a farmhouse called Brecourt Manor. Brecourt was a little less than 2 miles north of the village of Saint-Marie-du-Mont. 14 2nd Battalion soldiers, including 12 from Easy Company, such as Wild Bill Garnier, Don Malarkey, Carwood Lipton, and Buck Compton, were assigned the mission of taking out the heavily camouflaged guns at Brecourt. The cannons were guarded by 50 Germans. Dick Winters would lead the men as the acting commander of Easy. It was just after 7 a.m. in Normandy on D-Day.
If they respect you and trust you, that's about all you can ask, and but you gotta be earned.
Brecourt Manor hasn't changed much since that day in 1944. The locations of the 4 German guns in a trench along this hedgerow were filled in long ago. Cows still graze in the field where First Lieutenant Dick Winters led soldiers on a pivotal mission on D-Day. The legend of which lives on thanks in part to words in a book and images from a television series I was part of, which recall the story but cannot fully convey the anxiety and adrenaline of entering combat for the first time.
When I was called up to headquarters and I had to take out those guns, the first thing I did was go off by myself, crawl out this one hedgerow to scout it out. Came back and I gave my orders. With Compton, you go up this hedgerow and I'll go up this hedgerow. So that if we do get pinned down, we both won't be pinned down at the same time. And we got everybody together, set up the 2 machine guns we had to lay down a base of fire, and had Compton, Popeye, Wynn, and Malarkey go out there and try to put some hand grenades on them, so that with the instructions, as soon as you throw those hand grenades, we'll all charge. Which we did, and we were fortunate enough to get in there as those hand grenades are going off, and we got on top of them.
They all eventually ran out of ammunition, and that's why we pulled out of here. And when we ran out of ammunition, why it was then it was Ronald Spears that captured that, knocked out the 4th gun.
Brecourt Manor and its surrounding fields have been owned for centuries by the WWII family. Today, Charles de Valavier still runs the dairy farm. On June 6, 1944, Charles' father, Michel, then 24 years old, Michel's brother Louis, who was 19, and their parents were huddled in the manor as the early hours of the D-Day invasion began. The Germans who lived on the farm were in a panic.
Il y a eu plusieurs alertes, quoi, les Allemands.
There was many alarms. The Germans were very nervous. It was a very agitated night and very hard night. My grandfather knew what was happening, and he realized that the civilians probably didn't know what was going on.
Charles de Valavier's grandfather, Colonel de Valavier, was all too familiar with the reality of war, having been wounded himself 3 times in World War I. World War II had already cost the de Valavier family 2 sons, both killed in 1940 when Germany invaded France. Charles de Valavier's grandfather sensed the Germans' anxiety on June 6, 1944 was justified.
Il y avait les deux à la fois.
Well, both at the same time, there was the experience of World War I and this agitation. He said something was going on, something was going down.
Parce que mon grand-père était un officier.
My grandfather was an officer of the First World War, and he lost both of his sons in the Battle of France. And the Germans were here at Brécourt, so and they had respect for the French who fought in World War I. It might appear strange, but that was the reality.
The area of the German gun battery at Brécourt was strictly off limits to the de Valavier family prior to D-Day.
Non, mais c'est aussi l'expérience de la guerre de mon grand-père.
Well, it's also my grandfather's experience, which he would not allow his children or anybody from his family to be part of this battle. He absolutely wanted to have his family stick together, to be as close as possible and as far away from the battle as possible.
As history tells us, First Lieutenant Richard Winters led the men in textbook fashion, and the 4 guns at Brécourt Manor were destroyed by 11 a.m., saving countless American lives at Utah Beach. For his leadership on D-Day at Brécourt, Richard D. Winters was recommended for the Congressional Medal of Honor and was eventually awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest military decoration awarded to a member of the United States Army.
I call him a Quaker. Right. True. No, I'm from Pennsylvania. If you're not from Pennsylvania, you don't know what I'm talking about. The Quakers and the Mennonites did not want to serve in the war. They're going to service without getting to combat. That's their religion. Fine. Winters, holy Christ, Reich 3, we're all going to get killed. He's a Quaker, which is true, but he's the best man we ever had. Even though I called him a Quaker, he said, when you wrote a book, he said he's a Mennonite, he's not a Quaker, which is fine. There's no malice intended for that, no malice intended at all.
By mid-afternoon, all of Brécourt Manor had been secured by American tanks and additional infantry, who cleared out the remaining Germans. Around that same time, 24-year-old Michel de Valavier left the manor with his family. De Valavier, hands over his head, appeared by this gate, alongside 2 German soldiers looking to surrender. All 3 men were shot by an American soldier. Michel in the back. The Germans were dead. Michel was seriously wounded.
Because they thought he was a German who was trying to get off by putting civilian clothes on. So he was gunned down and hit about 4 or 5 times. As soon as this cleared up, then the rest of the family came out, and there's our brother, there's our son. And they managed to get him evacuated, so that actually he was the first man evacuated from Utah Beach, Frenchman, back to England. He lived. He came back to St. Marie-de-Mont, and as life would work out, he became mayor of St. Marie-de-Mont. And after he became mayor, as the years went on, he had this idea of taking a pillbox from Utah Beach and making a museum out of it. And he did.
Despite being shot by the Americans, Michel de Valavier and his brother Louis spent the rest of their lives honoring their liberators. Michel was the first to reach out to Dick Winters 4 decades after the assault at Brécourt took place.
He sat down and he wrote me a letter. and he had not only his letter, which was in French, but he had some drawings and sketches of the action there. But as soon as I looked at it, I thought, this was my D-Day.
Ils ont échangé tous les trois. All three of them exchanged details of what happened that day. But we have to remember that the French who were living here at the time were not allowed to go up to that hedgerow. So there was the intensity of that battle. But everybody had their own version of the facts.
Charles de Valavier held on strongly to his family relationship with Dick Winters after his father Michel passed away in 1991.
Après la mort de mon père, well, after the death of my father, he came here many times. And often he would come with groups. He would come to Brécourt, and then we'd go to the bell tower of the Saint-Mary-du-Mont church. It was easier to make visitors understand what happened here being up in the church tower. He's a little bit like someone from my family. It's somebody with who we shared things, very intense things. Last time he came here, he went onto my father's grave, and I felt that regarding the wounds to my father, he felt a little bad, and I told him my father really didn't want to know anything about all that, just forget what happened. I understand that for them it was a little bit hard, but it wasn't up to our generation to talk about that. What strikes me, and will always strike me, is when we meet the other men from the company. We have the impression that if Dick was here, they would throw themselves into the fire for him. These men that respected him so much. A man that everything he did, everything was thought out. And I had much respect for him too.
J'espère que les petits-enfants un jour.
I hope that his grandchildren one day will come here one day.
Charles de Valavier's father, Michel, never held any grudge towards the American soldier who shot and almost killed him on June 6, 1944. Just the opposite. As mayor of Saint-Marie-du-Mont from 1949 to 1991, he founded the Utah Beach Museum in 1962 as a way to honor all the Americans who liberated Normandy.
Il explique dans une première interview télévisée.
He explains it in a very early interview when I was only 7 years old, that everybody must pay his price for liberty.
Richard Winters looked the part of a leader at Brécourt Manor on D-Day. He was handsome, well-trained, in control, and fearless. Any monument recognizing his and the contributions of other courageous leaders who fought here in France on June 6, 1944, would need to convey this. This statue, in particular, needed to demonstrate the focus and determination of a man in battle who was in total command of those he led and the environment in which he fought. As sketches turned into clay models and then bronze, sculptor Stephen Spears pored over World War II photos of his subject. He kept going back to Dick Winters' facial features.
The high cheekbones, the rock-solid jaw. Who better to sculpt for something like that? He really portrays that power and that strength. So I was thrilled to be able to sculpt someone like that.
As Easy Company moved through the war, from France to Holland and into Belgium, then Germany itself, the leadership abilities of Richard D. Winters earned him several promotions. From first lieutenant and acting leader of E Company on D-Day to the rank of major and commanding officer of the entire 2nd Battalion of the 506 by war's end in 1945.
Dick Winters was a great leader. I don't think he had an enemy. I think even the Germans must have liked him. But he was a great leader, and everything he did was right. He always, all his decisions were right. He made very few bad mistakes.
Richard D. Winters had proven his abilities to lead men in combat. The words, "hang tough," became a frequent E Company saying, used by many of the men. The words symbolized more than just being strong. They meant be prepared, always think about your options, stay one step ahead. all are the principles that define Dick Winters as a combat leader. 2 simple words.
You work together with the men in the field, and you love it. And this is where the men learn that in working together with you in the field, that they get the impression you know what you're doing, that you don't get lost in the woods at nighttime and make them put in extra miles that was not necessary, that you make the right decisions.
We idolized the man, and everybody would have followed Winters anywhere. If Winters had turned and said to us, well, we're going in somewhere and almost all of us are going to be killed, it wouldn't have mattered. We would have followed him, I'm sure.
He didn't demand it and hollering at you. He just spoke soft and easy, told you what you wanted to do.
He had compassion for his people. They had respect for him. He was focused. He was aware of what the situation was and what was required to meet the problem. A really good leader.
It is in the heat of battle where men are tested individually and where relationships are cemented forever. An indescribable bond is created between brothers. Dick Winters was aware of this in Normandy on D-Day. It was a connection we as actors in the series tried to convey to the audience, yet unless you were truly there in Normandy, will always be hard to fully grasp.
And you find this philosophy, and you see it in action. The point that you said, you'll die for one another. Well, that's just, that's a figure of speech, really. But it's true statements. You think you can't take any more. You do take more. If you can take it, I can take it. And we do it together. And doing it together makes your band of brothers.
Dick Winters believed that compassion and humanity also had a role in war. Knowing when to flip the switch on and off defines a leader who is in control. Killing Germans is your mission, but what happens when your enemy surrenders? It is a good commander who sets the example to his men for what comes next.
We take care of him and make sure that he is not shot down. Of course, we had examples of people who didn't observe that. We found examples of this in the first few days in Normandy. And the examples of those that were guilty of this type of thing are people who are men who are trying to prove that they're killers.
In Normandy, France, decades after D-Day, well-positioned German bunkers look out from rocky cliffs. Enemy strongpoints point towards the English Channel. Waves lap at sandy shores where Allied soldiers traded their blood for the freedom of others. A Spitfire buzzes by on a June 6th anniversary, recalling a different time. Visitors to churches gaze upon stained glass windows, celebrating not saints, but paratroopers and liberators. Fields divided by ancient hedgerows still dominate the landscape. Normandy remains alive with scenes of D-Day decades after the fight moved through this part of France and on to Berlin. American boys still lie here under white crosses and stars of David. The passage of time means fewer and fewer World War II veterans come back now to raise the flag at the American cemetery or make their way to visit with old brothers who never came home. Time marches on, but memories are forever.
They were one of my buddies, one of my fellow soldiers, and we were kind of like a family in a way. They were just kids, really. Our whole regiment averaged 21 years old, I think, officers and men, and they never had a chance to have families and children of their own. It's sad. It's sad.
On June 6th of every year, in the 11th century-old church in Saint-Marie-du-Mont, Easy Company's original objective on D-Day, a service in recognition of all the Allied invasion of Normandy is held. Bullet holes can still be seen on a nearby confessional. The fields surrounding the church were supposed to be the drop zones where E Company men were to land in the early morning hours of June 6, delivered by C-47s. But we all know that plan went out the window when German anti-aircraft bullets started flying. Many of the men of Easy, including First Lieutenant Richard D. Winters, were dropped instead near another church in Saint-Mère-Église, about 5 miles away. As they made their way back towards Saint-Marie-du-Mont, they were given the task of taking out the guns at nearby Brécourt. It is here, in this setting during the passing of yet another June 6th anniversary in Normandy, that leadership on D-Day is being memorialized in bronze for generations to come. All the American Army divisions who took part in Operation Overlord will be honored. The residents of Normandy helped make this day a reality.
There's a passion, there's an involvement that the French have, and respect for the veterans that is just an amazing sight to see. And it's something that knowing that this is on their land and their homeland and things, they're just absolutely thrilled with the opportunity to have it here.
I am the parish priest of Saint-Marie-du-Mont and Saint-Mère-Église.
After the war, many of the soldiers who landed here would come back to Normandy and become honored guests of French families, welcomed as a son or brother would be, as was the case with Dick Winters and the WWII family at Brécourt.
Dear veteran friends and your families.
Roughly 1,000 people gather on a heavily overcast June 6th anniversary in Normandy. The weather is eerily similar to what the conditions were many decades ago on this exact day.
Leadership.
There are governors here, as well as mayors, generals, and foreign dignitaries. Local farmers and apple growers are here too. They journey to this spot, just off the main road from Saint-Marie-du-Mont to Utah Beach, the Route of Liberty they call it, to honor courage, initiative, and most importantly, leadership on D-Day. Men, women, and young children come to recognize men like Richard D. Winters.
The 1st 101st Airborne Division Commander, Major General Bill Lee, before they went into Normandy said, "We have no history, but we have a rendezvous with destiny." His words were very prophetic, and on 6 June 1944, right here at Normandy, the first pages of the 101st Airborne Division history were written by men like Dick Winters and the men that are sitting here today.
We will never forget, here at Saint-Marie-du-Mont and elsewhere upon the lands and cliffs and foothills, what storied men did to keep the story of freedom alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Richard D. Winters Leadership Monument recognizing all those who led the way on D-Day. There we go.
leadership is what Dick Winters wanted us to remember of him. What he wanted marked upon this statue with more prominence than his name, and what he wanted us to pay homage to in honoring the moments and makers of a valiant history.
Pour vous avoir rencontré quelquefois.
Having met you on certain occasions, your eyes, your smile, and your discretion were signs that characterize your convictions and your determination. This monument, erected in our commune, will be here to remind us that forgetfulness will not erase your memory.
Merci à vous, Major.
Thank you, Major, and also to your band of brothers from Easy Company.
The task given to sculptor Stephen Spears was to create a leadership monument to a man who would represent many hundreds of men. A memorial to a soldier who was humble and would only agree to be recognized if all those in every other American Army divisions who took part on D-Day were as well.
First of all, you want to be sure and make him happy with what it is. You want his family, you want everyone involved to be able to be comfortable with what it is you're portraying. At the same time, finding little ways to be able to make sure people know who this man is. The Screaming Eagle on his arm patch, his name on the jacket. Those are important things, but they have to be subtle in the way that they come out, and yet give the strength and character of who this man was. So I was thrilled just with the opportunity to be able to do something to portray this man. I just wish he could have been there to see it.
For me, in portraying Dick Winters, the challenge lay in understanding the man himself, who, while humble, was always in control of the situations which surrounded him. There was a quiet confidence about Dick, and he was guarded with his thoughts. But what was obvious from the first time we met was how his leadership principles contributed to the overall well-being of his men.
I don't want to take from the men. I want the men to feel that I'm giving to them, that I'm there when they need help, when they need advice. I'm there to make sure that they're treated fairly.
It was Normandy and its people who donated this land and wanted this day. But in reality, this area was as important to Richard D. Winters as it is to the French. For it was here he was first tested in battle and displayed all the characteristics that would make him an exceptional combat leader in World War II. The foundation of the Richard D. Winters Leadership Monument speaks to the importance of its surroundings.
We're in such a beautiful region. It has such history, and the buildings, the architecture, the stonework and things. I thought it would be so perfect in the fact that these are airborne guys. They dropped into the middle of everything here. So what better landing spot for him to be on than the natural stone from here in the region? And to have it complement the shape and the direction of the bronze itself seemed ideal with the three granite panels that give the information with his quote.
A quote which does not glorify war, but honors those who responded when called upon.
He didn't want anything to actually portray him, and I think that this is about all of the units. It's about the character and the strength of leadership.
The discs at the top of the pedestal of the Leadership Monument recognize all the American Army divisions and corps who jumped behind the hedgerows, landed on the beaches, and climbed steep cliffs in the opening moments of the liberation of Western Europe. They will be here in bronze, forever representing all leadership on D-Day.
The one unit that you don't see in those discs around the outside is the 101st, and that's where he's that one disc in the middle, dropping right into the heart of everything.
en échange,
Through exchanges and emails, I promised him that it would be placed exactly on that site. And to keep your word to a man like that, it's an honor.
Thanks to the French in donating that land, it enables a location for people to want to have the opportunity to come to this area and to see so much of where that story started. The first time I saw it in place, I was very happy with the feeling of seeing how it looked with the horizon and Utah Beach in the background, and the sky in the background and the fields around him. It just seems to be the perfect place for him to be there for generations to come.
Over time, this monument will age as the men of D-Day have done, quietly, with dignity and grace.
And probably one of the greatest compliments that I've received was from Charles, who is the owner of the Utah Beach Museum, who had met Richard Winters many times. He came up to me at the dedication and said, "You've caught his expression. You have that feeling in his face." That's what I need to hear. And every year, every anniversary, there will be people bringing those flowers and setting them down in tribute to what they've done here.
J'ai eu la chance de rencontrer Dick Winters. I've had the chance to meet Dick Winters many times. The visit which marked me the most was his last in 2001 for the premiere of Band of Brothers at Utah Beach. We spent a great deal of time together, and alone he retraced the path he used in the taking of the cannons of Brecourt. His face had the most intense of expressions. After the ceremonies, before leaving, I offered him a medal made specially for the occasion. He refused it. From his pocket, he produced a well-worn-out medal, which my father had given him 30 years before. He said that he always kept it with him, and that it was his good luck charm. I was so moved.
Richard D. Winters was one of World War II's finest combat leaders, and in Normandy has become a part of the fabric of this historic region. It is an honor for me to share with the world his story of leadership, courage, and valor on D-Day and in World War II. As the leadership statue bearing his name and likeness settles in overlooking Utah Beach and in sight of Brecourt Manor and Sainte Marie du Mont, it casts a determined glare across the field where Dick Winters first instilled in his band of brothers the words his men would hear during some of the most difficult and challenging times of the war in Europe. Hang tough.